Hey there, Duke fans. This is Jason Evans coming at you. I have a bit of breaking news before we get to today's podcast. As you probably have heard, Dariq Whitehead broke a bone in his foot on Monday, and he had surgery today, Tuesday. They say that he will be back in the fall, and depending on your definition of the fall, that would seem to make it likely that he may not miss any games for the Blue Devils. And even if he does, it would probably only be a few early season games. Of course, with any freshman like Dariq Whitehead, the bigger problem may be the practices that he misses early in the season. You don't want any freshman to fall behind, and that could be what we're talking about with Dariq Whitehead. We're only talking, by the way, about a guy who is projected to be Duke's best player this season and a top lottery pick. So this is obviously a big deal for the team. Assuming he's back before December, there's plenty of time, though, to get him integrated to the team in time for ACC play. We're going to have much more on this news on our next podcast over the weekend. But the truth is, this news came out after we recorded our latest podcast. So Donald and Sam are not here with me to react to it right now. We'll put it on the shelf. We'll table it for just a little bit, and we'll bring you information on it when we get it in a couple days. For now, we're about to bring you our preview of the Duke football season. We may be the Duke basketball report, but we also cover Duke football. And this preview features one of the smartest guys around about Duke sports. Here you go. Enjoy. Hey there, Duke fans. Welcome to episode 440 of the DBR Podcast, the Duke Basketball Report. We are renaming ourselves, at least for part of the podcast today. We are the Duke Football Report for the next half hour or so, because we're going to be talking about the upcoming season for the Duke Blue Devils as Mike Elko, the Elko era, begins. I am Jason Evans. I'm your host on this journey this week. Joining me, as always, Donald Wine and Sam Klein. Donald, how you doing this morning?
A bit bummed because, as we discussed briefly on the last show, the SLS Artemis launch was scrubbed. There are issues, and looks like we may not get to see that for at least a few days until they figure out what's going on. But on a space nut, I want to see a rocket this morning.
Yeah, well, we should bring in our space guru, the man who worked on the rocket, Sam Klein. Sam, what are your thoughts? I know your thoughts are not good.
My thoughts are classic.
I told you so.
Duh. This is exactly how this program works. If this thing actually flies, I should have lost. I was telling you guys this morning over text that when I left my old space job at ULA in 2018, I bet my boss at the time that I would graduate business school before SLS flew. And I've now been in my post-business school job for 2 years prior to SLS flying. So I should have been more aggressive and just said, I bet the thing's never going to fly. But I think at this point it will. It's just a matter of when, if it's this week or next month or something. But yeah, man, what a bummer. I just want to see that thing go into space already.
How much money has been spent on this, Sam? Do you know? I'm sure you know.
It depends on how you do the accounting, but at least $23 billion has been spent developing SLS, and then a lot more money developing Orion, which is the spacecraft that's flying on top of it. So, yeah, it's expensive.
Yeah, billion here, billion there. Pretty soon you're talking about real money.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, Jim Sumner's here.
Yeah, that voice that voice from the wilderness, that is Jim Sumner. Who is one of the leading experts on Duke football, Duke basketball, all Duke sports. Jim has been writing for decades about Duke sports. Jim, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Jason. Good morning. Good Monday morning. I'm not sure that's not a contradiction in terms, but we'll go with that. Good Monday morning.
And by the way, Jim, I want to tell everybody, for a long time, Jim wrote for the Duke Basketball Report. Unfortunately, he's not doing that any longer. Jim, where can folks find your outstanding analysis and writing about Duke sports at this point?
Well, you can go to Substack. Technically, it's jimsumner.substack.com, or you can just, if that's too much to remember, just go to Substack and put my name in the search engine, and it should pop up.
Yeah, and folks, I've subscribed to Jim's Substack, so I get his articles every time they come out. They are outstanding, as they always have been for the longest time. I cannot recommend more highly that you make sure that you are getting everything that Jim has to say about Duke athletics, because it is some learned analysis, that is for sure. And so, Jim, the reason we have you on today is that you've been attending the scrimmages, practices. What's been your exposure to Duke football over the past few weeks?
Well, I've had two scrimmages, both open to the media. I've attended both of those. I've attended not all the practices, but a good many of them, the ones that have something approaching a scrimmage. So I guess I've got about as good a feel of what's going on as anybody in the media, which is to say not much, because as you know, they're going to keep these things pretty vanilla when the media is there. If Mike Elko and his coordinators have anything really fancy up their sleeve, they'll keep it up their sleeves for at least 5 more days.
And I'm going to let Donald and Sam dive more into the team itself, but I just wanted to ask you for your impressions of Mike Elko. I mean, obviously they're new players on offense and defense, and the players are who we're going to focus on in a bit. But I want to start with your impressions of the coaching staff.
Mm-hmm.
Start me with Mike Elko.
Well, he seems very methodical, very meticulous, very precise. I think he and his staff know what they want. They aren't skipping steps. They're teaching them. I think his emphasis was on bringing in teachers. If you want to talk about the staff as a whole, from the very, very beginning, he has been quite upfront that when he was talking to Duke about this job, talking to Nina King and Art Chase and everybody else about this job, he insisted that he had to have an upgraded salary for his assistants, and he got that, and he's brought in people with a proven track record in most cases at Power 5 schools. I think one of the things that you get when you're talking to the players and the support staff is these people are teachers. They know how to teach techniques and concepts, and very specific little points like how you set up and that sort of thing. I think you have to respect Elko for the way he has refused to throw David Cutcliffe under the bus. And I'll say this up front: I love David Cutcliffe. What he did at Duke was remarkable, and it was time for him to go. And I think in large part it was because the quality of assistant coaches had dropped, and that was because of the dollar signs he was able to wave in front of assistant coaches. When he started losing people like Jim Knowles and John Latina and Mike McIntyre, he was unable to replace them with equal caliber coaches. And I think Mike Elko has come in, and this is his first time as a head coach. He's been an outstanding defensive coordinator. He was a safety at Penn. He knows defense, but he's understood from the very beginning, I'm a CEO of a big organization. I've got, and I've talked to him about this. He said the hardest thing I've had to learn how to do is delegate. But he's learned how to delegate to his other coaches, and they are all taking control of their position groups. And you talk to the players, that's the first thing you hear. These guys know how to teach.
And my last question regarding the coaching staff is, what do you think their expectations are for this first season? I'm going to be honest. I've seen a lot of stuff that's projecting Duke to have 2, maybe 3 wins.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you think? Now, obviously, they're not going to come out and say to you, "Yeah, we'll be lucky to win 3 games."
Yeah.
But do you get a sense that they understand that this may be a real long-term process of turning this program around?
Well, it's funny. It's kind of, I don't think any of the coaches, the players are very upfront about this, that they expect to go to a bowl game this year, which is a big ask coming off of an 8-game losing streak.
I love that attitude, though. I mean, that's what they should be saying and thinking.
Yeah. But I haven't seen a coach who said that, but what they say is kind of a combination of 2 things. One is we owe it to these players to try to win as soon as we can. These guys came here expecting the coaches to give them their best effort, their best chance, best opportunity to win games, and we are going to fulfill that obligation, while also saying things like, I'm going to define success in terms of it's more process oriented. We want to establish our culture. We want to establish our goals, our program, and it's not a 1-year thing. We want to build towards better football teams in the future, and it starts this year. So I don't know that I mean, the thing is, Jason, if you look at last year, the way Duke started off with a very disappointing loss at Charlotte, a game that they should never have lost. They came back, they won 3 in a row. They beat 2 Power 5 teams, both at home, Northwestern and Kansas. Then they lost to North Carolina and Chapel Hill, got blown out. Then the Georgia Tech game was another game that was at home. They had so many chances to win that game, and they couldn't do it. After that, it was 6 blowouts in a row. They were not competitive at all. They lost scores like 62-22. Louisville had almost 700 yards of total offense against them. So you could see a lot of improvement, but not too many more wins, because you can get a lot better. You can, instead of losing 56-7, you're losing 28-21, and it's still a loss. So I think that certainly starts with being competitive. That said, I put the over-under wins at about 4. I will say right now, beating Temple this Friday is absolutely essential to this team having any success. I don't see how they can possibly get within shouting distance of a ball game if they lose this game.
Well, I like the attitude that the coaches are taking, and that you're reporting that they're being competitive. That's absolutely something we should expect. I'm gonna let Donald take a deep dive with you on the offense, then Sam's gonna do the defense. Donald, take it away.
Yeah, and I think start right where we think we're going to start, QB1. Mike Elko announced just a couple of days ago that Riley Leonard would be the starting quarterback, at least starting the season against Temple on Friday. Give us your thoughts on Riley Leonard and that battle that he kind of had in training camp between himself and Jordan Moore, the 2 most experienced guys coming back to replace Gunnar Humber.
Yeah, I think if you use the term most experienced, you need to put air quotes in it. Riley did get 1 start last year when Gunnar Holmberg was out with an injury, but he's a sophomore, true sophomore. This is a quarterback-centric league in the ACC. You look at people like Devin Leary, Sam Hartman when he comes back, Malik Cunningham, Ben Slyke. I mean, Brennan Armstrong. He's in a league. Duke's in a league with a lot of great quarterbacks, and I think it's a bit much to ask Riley Leonard to be a great quarterback at this point. That said, he looks like a great quarterback. He's 6'4", he's 215. He's got a strong, accurate arm. He carries himself like somebody who expects to be good. He has that aura of, I'm not talking about super cocky, but you just look at him, his body language. He never slumps. He never shakes his head. He makes a mistake, he owns up to it. He goes back to the drawing board and figures out how to not do it again. One thing about Leonard, if you remember when he was in high school in Alabama, he lit up social media with video highlights, but not from the football field, from the basketball field, from the basketball court. Mostly dunks. He was a very athletic dunker. He was All-State Alabama, a Player of the Year candidate, averaged over 20 points a game in a competitive league, could have gotten scholarships to not Power 5, not Duke level schools, but he was a guy who was always 360-degree windmill tomahawk dunks. So he's an athlete. He can run. But I think his running is more going to be keeping a play alive. I think he will be able to tuck the ball under and pick up yards. It will help him that he has an experienced offensive line and an experienced wide receiver core. It will hurt him that he does not have an experienced running back. That's the biggest question mark for quarterback. But when I was talking to the quarterback coach and offensive coordinator, Coach Johns, he was saying we are not, and this is when it was still a race between Leonard and Moore. Said we're not going to give him the whole playbook right now. We're not gonna leap past anything. We're going to concentrate on a few things that they can do well. So it may not be Steve Spurrier V2 with guys running all over the field. I think it'll be a pretty basic offense, at least at the beginning. If he proves he can master that, we'll see it open up a little bit.
So you kind of led into it with the running game, right? Last year, really the whole offense kind of centered around Mateo Durant. He had over 12, almost 1,300 yards from rushing and 1,400 yards from scrimmage.
Yeah.
How do you replace that? And especially given the fact that the guy on the team that has the most rushing yards that's returning is Jordan Moore, the guy who lost out the quarterback QB1 competition.
Yeah.
How do you incorporate him into that offense?
Well, it's kind of ironic, Donald. David Cutcliffe always said he wanted a 3-4 running. If you remember the year that Duke won the Coastal, he actually had a 4 running back rotation. He liked to have 3-4 running backs, and to keep them fresh, not keep them fresh in any individual game, and keep them fresh over the course of the season. One of the reasons, don't get me wrong, Mateo Duran had a great season. He was a great player last year. One of the reasons he was able to break the Duke single season rushing record, was there wasn't anybody else on the team to share touches with him. He was the only ACC level running back. So you have a coach who wants to use a lot of running backs. You had one. This year, back in the spring, Coach John Salters, he wanted a, quote, bell cow. He wanted one running back to seize that job and be his only guy. But he has since backtracked on that, and he said, we don't have a bell cow. We hope to use the versatility. So I think that's coach speak for, we're a little concerned about that. You mentioned Jordan Moore. He's going to be at wide receiver. I don't know if there's ever any plans to get him, to move him to running back. We saw last year when Moore was a quarterback, if he can get the ball in space, he's really, really dangerous. But I guess they figure the best way to do that is to throw it to him, not to hand it to him. Jordan Waters has 305 career rushing yards. He's the career leader in the running back room. Jalen Coleman has made an inspiring comeback after missing a year with Achilles surgery. We all know that having Achilles surgery can be a career ender, and here he is, competing for the job. And there's some other guys who are definitely going to be in the mix. But I think, that's a position that Duke would love to have one guy grab it by the throat and seize and say, "This is my job." But spring ball and fall ball, no one has done that. So I think that's clearly a concern. Duke doesn't want Riley Leonard to be their leading ball carrier. They need somebody to step up and say, I'm the man, give me the ball.
And you mentioned Riley Leonard. Of course, he's going to be throwing the ball, and there's, one guy absent from last year that was really good at catching the ball, and that's Jake Bobo.
Mm-hmm.
But we do have one back in Jason Calhoun. You mentioned Jordan Moore is also going to be in that wide receiver core, but who else is going to be out there to help kind of stretch defenses and get the ball downfield in a hurry, which is something that Duke struggled at immensely.
I think that's a big question. Well, Duke, you mentioned Jake Bobo. They do return Jalen Calhoun, who has 141 career receptions. They're both possession receivers. Duke has had trouble in recent years finding somebody who could get open deep and catch the ball. I'm not going to try to throw anybody in the bus. They've had some guys in recent years who could get open deep, but they couldn't catch the ball with consistency. So they've got a lot of guys who can run an 8-yard out and catch the ball. You've got 3 seniors, Jalen Calhoun, Eli Panko, and Gerald Harding, who have experience, and a junior, John Tavius Robertson, who has experience. Maybe Jordan Moore is that guy, but the guy in the wide receiver room that I think Duke fans need to keep an eye on is a sophomore named Samir Hagans. Had a really big spring. He's had a really big fall. He's not a big, like Harding is 6'4", 220. Hagans is 5'11", 185, 190, but he's the guy. I think he's maybe has the highest ceiling in that receiver group. It's going to be interesting to see if he can be the guy who can stretch the field. And Duke, I think lots of Duke fans would ask this question. I mean, some people, some of us remember Steve Spurrier, who famously said several times, "I want to throw the ball deep early every game, even if it misses, it gives the defense something to think about." Duke hasn't had that philosophy in a long time. And the reality is a lot has to go right to hit a 60-yard downfield strike. And it starts with the blocking. You got to give your quarterback time to throw the ball, time for the receiver to get open. You've got to give, the line's got to block, the quarterback's got to find the right man downfield. He's got to throw a well-thrown ball. The receiver has to be open. He has to catch it. Any one of those things goes wrong, and you're looking at 2nd and 10. So Duke has really stayed away from the deep ball. And it's hard to say if they're going. I think we'll see more deep shots this year. Again, as we were saying earlier, it's hard to say because they're keeping stuff in their pocket. Just to give an example, Duke, even going back in the spring, they didn't release a depth chart, and they told the media, don't even speculate. Please don't. That's been the case all fall. Don't even That's why it was an announcement that Riley Leonard, if you attended the scrimmage, which was open to the media but not fans, you saw Jordan Moore playing wide receiver and Riley Leonard playing quarterback. The only other recruited quarterback is Henry Bielan, who's a true freshman. So you knew Leonard, but they had to have an announcement for it because they've been so, I won't say paranoid, but the old World War II expression, loose lips sink ships. That's a staple of the college football mindset. I'm sure the Temple coaches were saying, gosh, who's going to be the first string tight end? Who's going to be, we can't game plan. And so, that I have a feeling they're keeping some stuff under the, under their collar to, bring out. But right now we haven't seen a lot of deep shots. And in the scrimmages, and one of the reasons why, Donald, is they really want to establish the running game. I've seen portions of scrimmages where Duke would run the ball 6-7 plays in a row between the tackles. That if you go back to spring, the buzzword was physical, or its close relative physicality. They want us to be able to run the football, and this is where you have to have, one or more of these running backs this season. But this is a team, they dedicated themselves to getting bigger and stronger. They hit the weight room really, really hard. They've improved their nutrition. I mean, you don't think about the training table, but these guys rave about the new nutrition program, the people that are staffing it, the greater availability of high quality food, the input that they have. Can you make this? Can you make this? Duke has really upgraded its training table, and that's not the kind of thing that sells tickets to the fan base. Come see your new Duke football team, the one that's been well fed, but they are committed to putting out better conditioned, more physically fit football players. And to the extent that I can tell this sort of thing, these guys do they look ripped, they look confident, they look like they're ready to go. I won't say they're ready to go into a football game.
Well, they say the devil is in the details, and I'm hoping, I think we're all hoping and looking forward to seeing if the Blue Devil details are all working themselves out, especially on Friday night. I think from the offensive standpoint, we've covered a lot, and I want to switch to the defense because I know there's also some questions on that side of the football. So I'm going to hand over to Sam so he can take over for me and talk about the defense.
Yeah, I think you've both referenced the performance last year on defense, which down the stretch was really not one that Duke wants to remember too deeply. And in the spirit of that,
Sam, I'm sorry, I'm going to correct you. It was awful.
I would
also accept
your words.
Hideous, abysmal. Yeah.
Well, so in the spirit of that, of course, Duke had 2 co-defensive coordinators last year. Those guys are gone. That includes alum Jeff Ferris, and Coach Elko has brought in 2 new co-defensive coordinators, Rob Smith and Jess Simpson. So maybe we can start there. Jim, what's your impression of those guys coming in? No experience between the 2 of them at Duke, but some other prominent line items on their resume that hopefully bring a new flavor to this program.
Well, Smith has been the guy that's had all the media contacts, so I think he's the first among equals. He's if there's one in 1A, he's one. One thing that I guess probably the most important thing about the defense is they putting enormous emphasis on improved tackling. If you remember back in the Carl Franks, Ted Roof era, Duke couldn't tackle. They were terrible tackling. The biggest improvement David Cutcliffe made when Duke was good in the middle part of his tenure is they didn't miss tackles. Guys like Jeremy Cash and Kelby Brown, these guys did not miss tackles. And all of a sudden, the last few years, there's been some real slippage. You saw a lot of Duke guys playing matador defense, particularly at the second and third level, at the linebacker and safety and cornerback positions, which was turning a lot of 8-yard plays into 60-yard touchdown plays. So they have worked enormously hard on tackling. And I have not seen very many missed tackles in what I've been watching. And I have written it's entirely possible. I cannot rule out the possibility that Duke's offensive players aren't good enough to make people miss. I mean, we talked about the problems that Duke has, the questions, I guess, maybe at running back. Maybe tackling these guys is different than tackling good running backs at Virginia Tech and Miami and Pittsburgh, but we'll see. But there's been a tremendous emphasis on tackling. Coach Smith, I think we're still going to be using a 4-2-5, but I think he's expressed a little more flexibility depending on the game situation, depending on the strengths and weaknesses of the opposing team. He was telling us if depending on what we might see some sets with 3 defensive linemen, we might see 6 DBs, or we might see 3 linebackers. He wants to be able to put pressure on the quarterback with the down 4 linemen. He will blitz, but it's not going to be a mainstay. Again, unless he's blowing smoke, unless they're going to come out against Temple and blitz, every third play. But he seems to want to be able to establish consistent pass pressure with the 4 defensive linemen. One of those defensive linemen, Dwayne Carter, defensive tackle, is a really, really good football player. There are at least 2 guys on the defense, Carter and linebacker Shaka Hayward, who are next level players, and you've got to build your defense around the studs. Those will be the 2 guys they'll be building their defense around.
The Cutcliffe era, I think, was mostly defined, at least when it was good on the defense side, by speed as opposed to power. So it sounds like Mike Elko's taking maybe a slightly or at least the new defensive coordinators are taking a slightly different approach to building defensive talent than Coach Cutcliffe's guys did.
I don't think they would consider that a useful distinction. I'm thinking they think if you're in well conditioned, if you're your best self, you're going to be strong and fast. I asked Dwayne Carter about the off-season conditioning program and said, were you working on strength, quickness, cardiovascular? And he says, all of the above. We're trying to get bigger, stronger, and faster. I will point out, too, that there are some new faces. Probably the biggest single surprising disappointment on the football team last year was in the secondary. Well, on paper, that looked like a strength. They had guys like Josh Blackwell and Leonard Johnson and Lemmy Young and Jeremiah Lewis, experienced defensive backs who we thought, and I certainly thought, were going to have the potential to be a really excellent secondary, and it just didn't happen. And you can say, the defensive line didn't put enough pressure on opposing quarterbacks, and that would be true. You could point out that Duke faced a murderer's row of quarterbacks: Sam Howell, Kenny Pickett, Brendan Armstrong, Sam Hartman, Malik Cunningham. Every time you turned around, there was an all-world quarterback going. But the secondary really struggled. There's some new faces this year that are going to, I think people are going to notice. There's a kid named Darius Joyner from Alabama. He started out at Jacksonville State. He played last year at Western Illinois. He had 142 tackles in 11 games, was FCS first team All-American. Now that's a level below the ACC, but every time I've seen him play this year, every scrimmage, every practice, he's making plays. And he's got that, if you remember Chris Rumpf, he's got that Chris Rumpf personality. He's got that swagger. I used to tell Chris, you need to switch to decaf. He is on Darius Joyner. He is wired, but he's actually come out and said when in high school, his goal was to play basketball for Mike Krzyzewski. So he's where he wants to be, albeit not exactly, but he's where he wants to be at Duke. And he's a player who he's very proactive on defense. He runs. He's around the ball. He makes plays. He is going to be. He's probably going to be playing safety, like all football teams these days. You work your corners at safety, you work your safeties at corners, so you make, so you have that kind of positional flexibility. But remember that name, Darius Joyner, and then there's a true freshman named Chandler Rivers, a cornerback, and he's going to be on the field. I asked Elko about his philosophy on playing true freshmen. He says, we're going to play the best football players we have. If they're a freshman, you're going to play. If you're a freshman and you're better than a redshirt senior, you're going to play. So there are some new faces, some new bodies. There's Detrone Young, who played at Iowa State, a Power 5 school. He's moving over to finish back. So there are some new faces in the secondary.
Jim, I was going to ask you about a few of those guys, and then you just went and touched on them all. So my one sort of general observation about this team is that, at least when I look at projected depth charts, it's mostly returning guys that are getting all the spots. That, other than Chandler Rivers, there aren't that many freshmen that are projected to play on this team, even sophomores that are projected to get first team reps here. So given that this defense was not strong at all last year, how do you think about the difference between experience and talent with such a deficit across the board?
That's the old joke about a struggling football team. The good news is everybody's back. The bad news is everybody's
the same guys.
I think, like I said, it goes back to what I was saying earlier, that Coach Elko has consistently said we owe it to these guys to give them the chance to win. So I think he will give the veterans a chance. It'll be interesting to see what happens if Duke, bless you, if Duke struggles. Is there a point where he says, okay, we're going to go with the young guys? That's premature. Hopefully Duke won't struggle, but there are some younger players that I think. There's a linebacker named Trey Freeman from Durham, who's a sophomore, who had a really big spring. I don't think he's going to start if he's assuming Duke sticks with the 4-2-5. They have Shaka Hayward and Dorian Masuai, who's a veteran, will be there at the linebacker. But there are some young guys. I think the thing they're really hanging their hat on is improved tackling, improved physicality, and just better cohesion in terms of. I think if we think back, I know it's painful to think back to some of the games last year, but how many plays did we see where there was busted coverage and an opposing wide receiver would run down the field and catch the ball, and there wasn't a Duke defender in the same zip code? A lot, way too many. So I think they're thinking we've got some ACC level football players who just have to be coached better. And I'll say again, go back to Mike Elko. He has never, at least that I've heard, thrown David Cutcliffe and his staff under the bus. I asked him specifically, jobs like this usually come open because something was going wrong. What went wrong last year? And he just said, well, sometimes you just need a change. Sometimes things you just need a change.
Well, Jim, let's hope it's a positive change for Duke. I'm going to give it back to Jason, I think, to wrap up this conversation about the Gridiron Blue Devils.
Yeah, Jim, this was great. We really appreciate it. We hope we can have you back at some point to assess how the team's doing once we've actually seen them play real games. And the first one's coming up this week against Temple. So thanks again, sir. And before you go again,
Jason, just remind listeners the game is Friday night.
Yep.
Friday night.
Yes, it is. And we'll be back to talk about it very soon after it's over. But I was going to say, before you go again, remind folks where they can read your outstanding writing about Duke athletics.
Just go to Substack and type my name in. It'll come back, jimsumner.substack.com.
And you just had a really nice article about Chelsea Gray and the WNBA. This man covers everything that has to do with DUKE. Jim, thanks so much for being on.
Okay, Justin, thanks. I appreciate it. Have a good rest of your day, rest of your week, rest of your month.
All right, guys, we have to talk about some of what Jim Sumner had to say to us. Great analysis from him. I'm going to start and say this. I love what he had to say about the coaching staff, about Elko recognizing that he's the CEO, about him bringing in assistants who will be teachers, about paying those assistants better. Hugely, hugely important. And I love that they said they want to do the right thing by these players and give them a chance to win as many games as possible. And then Sam, when he was talking to you and he talked about Darius Joyner, the transfer from Western Illinois, and how that guy's just flying around making plays. I'll admit it, I'm not someone who pays a ton of attention in the preseason to Duke football. I've got a name to watch out for on defense now, thanks to Jim Sumner. What was your takeaway, Sam?
That the rhetoric around coaching changes has not changed since 2007 when Duke hired Coach Cutcliffe. The team is hitting the weight room and they're getting back to nutrition and they're doing all the things to turn the program around. Look, I don't think that Duke football in 2021 was in the same place that Duke football was in 2007, but some of the same issues are highlighted here. The general, lack of progress, and maybe the team's nutrition and weightlifting and all the sort of ancillary stuff around the field had improved to the point where it was, mid-level ACC quality by the time Cutcliffe really got things going. And then maybe they just fell behind because everyone was moving faster than them. So part of what you look for in a coaching change, like Jim was saying at the end there, is not that, we need to install new schemes and the old guy doesn't have the right schemes. Like Coach Cutcliffe can't learn the new schemes. Coach Cutcliffe made a lot of changes to the way that he approached game planning and recruiting, even in the time that he was at Duke. The challenge is that things can get stale, and sometimes you just need the fresh faces to come in and say, hey, we're not going to do it this way anymore, and I'm not burdened by whatever you all did 5-6 years ago to make things work. I'm coming in with new perspectives. Duke is not just Mike Elko, but brought in a few other coaches who have Power 5 experience in other programs and a little bit of NFL experience, and you just need that fresh perspective. The Duke coaching staff, especially in recent years, was populated with a lot of Duke alumni. And as good as the program was for a few years there in the early teens, it's not like a staff full of Duke football players is the same as a staff full of Duke basketball players, like the guys who have all been making Final Fours and winning ACCs during their time in college. So I'm looking forward to the fresh start, and I'm looking forward to seeing, the kind of progress they make. They do have a tough schedule this year, so I don't want to set the expectations too high, but I think that Mike Elko and his staff can make a lot of progress in a short time.
And really quick to react to what you just said there. So first of all, I think the key, and Jim Sumner touched on this, it's not necessarily W's. Obviously, we want wins, but it's being competitive. It's competing better than we were last year. No question about that. Number two is you talked about, everybody says new coach, new weight room, stuff like that. I will say I saw a ton of videos in the past month or two on Twitter of Duke guys in the weight room, setting records and doing all kinds of stuff. There, I don't know if behind the scenes the same stuff was happening in the past, but they weren't promoting it the way they have been this year. So that matters to me. And then last thing is, we've been spoiled by Coach K and by the success of the basketball program. Having a change every decade or so, probably not a terrible thing. And you talked about the fact, Duke guys in the program, obviously we love it when our alumni get, coaching jobs. But at the same time, look how excited all Duke fans were and everyone who follows Duke basketball was about bringing in Jay Lucas. I think it's a really good thing that Mike Elko, that we have this fresh blood and that it's guys who bring perspective from a lot of different programs. So, Donald, what are your takeaways from what Jim had to say?
Yeah, well, for me, I mean, I was on the video staff for the Carl Franks era and the beginning of the Ted Roof era. So I have seen a lot of terrible football at Duke University firsthand. And I know Sam was a manager on the team, but he was a manager in the Cutcliffe era, which I attribute to being basically the Nick Saban era of college football at Duke. compared to what I had to go through. So I say this, I say this, with all respect, right? The foundation was laid under Cutcliffe. We had a point where, as Sam said, we kind of went to kind of the middle of the ACC, competed for bowl games, competed for division titles, and we had one, year where we really went for it. And I think we kind of regressed to the mean, sort of, in a little bit towards the end of that tenure. So now we do have to get back to that foundation, which is, being stronger in the weight room. I mean, when Cutcliffe came in, he talked about they had a goal of the entire team losing 1,000 pounds because he thought everyone was overweight and he needed to get guys leaner, faster, more physical. Now there's a new emphasis on nutrition, a new emphasis on, being stronger and setting that standard of, hey, we're going to get better and we're going to improve ourselves every single day. Will that take this year? Maybe not. And I mean, I think we all hope that we can get to a bowl game this year. I think that's a great goal. Is it a realistic goal? It's a very difficult one, but it's realistic. It's something that can happen, but it is a difficult schedule that we face this year. And I think there's going to be some growing pains as we get to enter this new era of Duke football. But I still maintain my excitement about it because there's nothing like having a college football Saturday. I don't care where you are, even at Duke. Even when we were 0-12 every single year, I was excited every Saturday for Duke football, and especially at the beginning of the season. So everyone get out to Wallace Wade on Friday. Everyone support this team as they enter this new era under Mike Elko. And honestly, these players, again, they're talking the right game. They're confident, and I want them to show that. And there are two things I want to see. I want to see big plays on offense because that gets excited, that gets the team energized. And on defense, I want to limit that big play. There's a lot of other details that we can talk about, and we'll probably talk about them as the season goes. But for Friday, I want to see those two things because if we can make the big play and stop the big play on defense, I think we're winning more ball games than most people think we.
All right, so that's going to wrap it up for our preview of the Duke football season. We got to take a commercial break. When we come back, an ugly racist incident making headlines on sports pages all over the country. Duke's involvement in it when we return. All right, we're back from the break, and we got to talk about what happened at BYU. Duke volleyball player Rachel Richardson, who's a starter on the volleyball team and is an African American. Duke was playing in a tournament at Brigham Young University, and every time Rachel would go back to serve, she would hear chants from the BYU student section of people calling her the N-word. And there's no way. I don't care. I don't care what you think about a lot of different political stuff. I don't care what you think about being woke or whatever else it may be. That's unacceptable. It's a terrible part of American history, of human history, that needs to be eliminated and cannot exist in a modern society. So there's a lot of controversy surrounding this because Rachel went back to the huddle and spoke to the coaches about it, and they decided collectively together that they were not going to let these racists win, that they were not going to let them know that it was affecting Rachel at all, and that they were going to continue to play the match. And there are people who say that Duke should have been more forceful during the match to get it controlled and taken care of. By the way, everyone is just saying BYU is, 98.9%, 99.9% of the blame falls on BYU. But Donald, I know you have some thoughts, some comments on a really, really ugly day in NCAA sports. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'll start off by saying this. As a Black person, we always have a plan. And sometimes when you go to certain places in this country, you have to have a plan as a Black person. You have to have backup. You have to understand that you're going into a place that things can happen. And most people traditionally would say parts of the South are those places that kind of, exude those type of, thoughts and how to do it. But I'm going to tell you guys, Utah is one of them too. And it's not just Utah. And I don't want to single out the state of Utah, but Utah is a place that when Black people go, they have to have a plan, because there's documented history of racism occurring within the borders of that state. Now, it's not at BYU, it's not always, but at certain places. But I guarantee you that Rachel Richardson and the rest of the Black players on the team, of which she's not the only one, there's several Black players on the volleyball team, they probably had a plan on what to expect when they went to play these games, because it is not the first time that this has happened in Utah sports history. It's not the first time this has happened in Utah at all. I've only seen, when I've been to Utah, half a dozen times, and the only Black person I've ever seen while I've been there, and this of course is anecdotal, is when me and my friend went to a wedding together. But again, even then we had a plan of what to do, how to have each other's back if something were to go awry. And I say this, we had the same thing in Durham. We had the same thing in Raleigh. We had the same thing in some of these towns all up and down the South. Sam, you're in Boston. I have the same plan in Boston because it's happened there too. Like, it's not, again, I'm not putting any extreme focus on one particular city, but this happens a lot. And I think the issue is this: people are not listening to what Rachel Richardson and the rest of the Black players had to say. And I think I'm glad that she came out with her statement. I hate that she had to do that, but I'm glad that she came out with it, because it shifted what a lot of people thought about who was to blame. Because of course, everyone was looking A, for blame, and B, for, accountability. The accountability is not going to come because it's already happened. And at the same, for BYU to come out and kind of say, this is someone who was in the student section who wasn't a student, we don't have any affiliation with this person, and he's been banned. That's not enough, because it was a record crowd at that game. BYU set a record for attendance at BYU volleyball for that match. And every single person in that gym, everybody failed those Black players by not stepping up and saying something. If it was just one person, that person should have been booted out long before security and police had to be put in front of the Duke section. Now, I want to shift to I keep going to the BYU. I want to talk about Duke for a second. I think what they did is they clearly had a plan of how to attack this. And, Rachel Richardson talked about the anti-racist training that they have been through as a team collectively. And again, they probably had some sort of plan of, hey, whenever this happens, no matter where we go, this is how we react. And I will tell you, the people who say that Duke should have left the court and they should have removed themselves from the situation are not necessarily thinking the way that a lot of Black people do. I know what Rachel Richardson was thinking. She wanted to beat their ass. She wanted to just save all her strength and take it out on the court, because honestly, for me, if that were me in my situation, the only strength that we have in that moment when someone calls you the N-word is to channel it towards beating someone's ass. And it may not be right to do it to that particular person. So in her instance, she was like, I'm just going to try and win this ball game and stick it to everybody in this gym who backed that person up when they were making the racist remarks. So you have to understand, some people lose all sort of focus when that happens to them. And it's hard to explain in words what you're feeling at that moment, but the words less than nothing mostly come to mind. To be able to suppress all that and still play a volleyball game, I have so much respect for Rachel Richardson and all the other Black players on that team, and all the players on Duke's team, for, again, saying, what do we want to do? How do we want to react to this? How do we want to do it? They may not have won the ball game, but they won in my eyes because they had her back the way that she wanted them to have their back. And it does not matter what me or anyone else thinks about what they should have done. They did what their teammate wanted them to do. And I think people are missing that part of it. And I think when we talk about how much blame does Duke have in this, how much blame does BYU have in this, they did their jobs by having her back. The people who did not have their back, for BYU, imagine this. Something happens on the road. In Duke basketball, we've had a lot of things happen on the road. Coach K is not going to a microphone and telling people to stop like he would in Cameron. Why? Because that's not his house. BYU needs to take care of their house. And they may say they don't have a history of this, but again, this is not necessarily an institution that has a history of it, but a state that does. And they need to recognize that the quote unquote apology that they put out was not enough. And they need to do more. They need to be able to police better. And they need to be able to, again, have these situations where they stop the game immediately. The referees should have stopped the game immediately. They had more power than Rachel Richardson did at that moment. They had more power than Duke did at that moment. And I want people to be clear that when it comes to this, blanket statements about what they should have done do not help the situation, because most people making that assumption do not know what she was going through. As someone who has had that happen to him on the field, I know exactly what she was thinking. She was thinking, take it out and beat them to a smithering pulp on the court and let that statement be the way that carries the day. And honestly, she had more strength than I ever would in that moment, because she was able to suppress that. And I really commend her for that. And I really, I thank her for coming forward with her thoughts on it. And I just hope people listen to it, because it's very important to listen to what Black athletes have to say about these type of moments, because they still occur way too frequently. And this will not be the last time this happens, but I hope people take something from it.
Donald, I don't want to add too much more other than to say thanks for sharing all that with us. It's obviously a different conversation that Jason and I couldn't have without you. So I don't have much to add to that other than to note that it sounds like the Duke people involved in this at least are rallying around each other, and that they're supporting each other, and that there's not, at least publicly, any big blame going around. So I'm glad that at least on the side that I care the most about, that they're taking care of each other. I don't want to speculate about exactly what's going on at BYU and the politics involved there, but I'm glad that Duke seems to have things in order. We know that the leadership at Duke in the athletic department is conscientious of all this kind of stuff, and that they're doing what they can to make it a supportive and inclusive environment for all the student athletes. And that's really all we can ask for. So,
there's a simple, to some extent, cure for this, which is diversity. It's hard to hate people when you know them as friends, as colleagues, whatever it may be. One of the problems that they have at BYU, one of the problems you have in the state of Utah, but especially at BYU, is that there's a startling lack of diversity on their campus. It's partially the nature of the religion and some other stuff, but regardless of that, the statistics clearly show that if you're someone at BYU, you're just not going to encounter many people of color. Like an incident like this, I'll go ahead and say it. An incident like this could not happen at Duke, because if you start shouting the N-word and you were in the crowd at Duke, there would be a huge percentage of the crowd that would just be like, excuse me, no. And would take make it clear that that is not acceptable, because we have diversity on campus.
I would say, just to push back slightly, that this can happen anywhere. This can happen at Duke. I think the reaction is what you're saying would be much different.
Right,
and
exactly.
I agree with you there. That
Exactly.
reaction would be much different, but make no mistake, this is something that probably has happened on campus, and again, it will happen anywhere you turn your head, because for us, we kind of have to keep our head in the swivel, because as we know, it can happen at any moment.
Oh, to me, the worst part of it is not that a guy was yelling the N-word. The problem is that there wasn't a crowd of people saying, stop, no, that is not acceptable, and that he was able to do it repeatedly throughout the entire match. That's what I'm saying would not happen at Duke, based on the type of place that it is, and based on the diversity we have on campus. And my point with all this is, this has been a prominent enough incident. It has been in the headlines enough so that if you are a person of color and you were considering BYU, you're probably thinking twice. You're probably thinking 3 times. You're probably not going. And that's the really unfortunate part of this kind of thing, because like I said, the solution is we have more diversity at our universities, in our workplaces, at sporting events all over the place. And this kind of incident and the publicity surrounding it is going to impede any effort there might be at BYU to bring more diversity to their athletes, to their sporting events, to their university. And that, to me, is really unfortunate because it will slow down the progress that we need to make as a society.
Yeah, Jason, and honestly, again, I'm with Rachel Richardson. I know we all stand with her and the rest of the Duke volleyball team as they go through this and honestly, take a little bit more scrutiny than they should, because at the end of the day, these are 18 to 22-year-old women playing a college game, and they have to deal with real life at the same time. So I do not envy the position that they're in, but I hope that through this, that as a team, they become stronger because of it.
So with that, we're going to wrap it up here on episode 440 of the Duke Basketball Report podcast. Not a lot of basketball in this podcast, but that's okay. A lot of Duke, important Duke stuff that we had to discuss with you. I am Jason. He is Donald. He is Sam. We want to thank you for joining us once again. Do not forget, anytime you want to, send us an email, dbrpodcast@gmail.com. That's the way to reach us. We respond to all those emails that we get, and you can write to us about anything you feel like chatting about. Again, we want to thank Jim Sumner for coming on and chatting with us about Duke football. Like Jim said, reach out to him on Substack, Jim Sumner. Find him. You will not be sorry. For Donald and Sam, I'm Jason. Guys, we got to run. Donald, you had one more thing?
Oh, I was going to say on the Jim Sumner Substack, like it's one of those things that just popped up. I think he started it about a week ago. So if you have not heard of it, it's not because you've been living under a rock. He just started it, but highly recommend it. I literally just subscribed as we were talking Duke football, and you should too.
There you go. So episode 440 in the books. Duke Band, it's your turn. Play us out and take us home.